I'm just going to go through some notes, and that although we can speculate on subjects such as the Anunnaki and Sumerian, and find obscure traces of this particular ultra-aristocratic secret order's existence in the Egyptian and Roman Empire, it seems to me that the farthest back cemented and reliable example of ultra-aristocratic conspiracism began with Clovis I and his becoming king of the Franks and subsequent baptism into the Catholic faith by the Pope of the time, Pope Symmachus. And indeed, Clovis was considered the Holy Roman Emperor before the term Holy Roman Empire was in existence. Indeed, it is Charlemagne who was first crowned the Holy Roman Empire / Augustus of the Romans, but I believe that Clovis I was pretty much in the same position. He was titled as the new Constantine, and indeed he was part of an ideal of a dual rule in Europe between the kingdom of the leader of the kingdom of the Franks, being Clovis I himself, and the papacy. And indeed the Clovis I and the dynastic kings after him until just before 800 AD were Merovingians, and the Merovingians were particularly well known for their brutality and extreme levels of totalitarianism. This is why certain thinkers such as Gobineau and de Maistre romanticize the Dark Ages of the Merovingians rather than the High Middle Ages, as most romanticists romanticize. Indeed, they are not looking for lords and ladies and courtship and the visions of the pre-Raphaelites, but instead total serfdom where the populace obey every whim of the ruling oligarchy. And indeed I believe this to be the forerunner of what we are witnessing today with the Jesuit order, because with the fall of the Merovingian dynasty we had the Knights Templars during the 12th century, and the majority of the Templars had Merovingian blood. And when the Templars were suppressed, many of them were sent in exile to Aragon in Spain, and through various changes they became known as the Aragon Templars first, then the Order of the Calatrava, then the Order of the Montesa, and then certain Templar bloodlines ended up in Los Alumbrados. I'm not saying Los Alumbrados, the Illuminati, were entirely Templarist or entirely Merovingian, because they most certainly were not, but there are some links there that are worth exploring. And I don't doubt that the plan for world domination that was put forth by the Los Alumbrados in their lodges before they became the Jesuit order would have been much different from a return to the style of government that occurred during the Merovingian dynastic period. And indeed this was continued later by Weishaupt, and indeed some may say by Marx, but Marx was effectively just tutored by the Jesuits. He wasn't for Jesuitism necessarily, and indeed communism is similar to the Paraguayan reductions of the Jesuits, but not exactly the same. But we see a lot of testing out of different ideals. What the Alumbrados wished to return to was some sort of very primitive feudal order, and this was tested out by the Jesuits in Paraguay to much success. So indeed the ideas of the return to the golden days in their view of the Merovingian kings, despite this era being nothing more than a dark age for the subjects, was paramount to the ideals of the Alumbrados, which is seen in the behavior of the Jesuits in Paraguay. And the only difference between the Jesuit reductions and the Soviet Union, which was a Jesuit experiment, was the introduction of industrialization and factories, which did not exist in the primitive jungles of Paraguay. But generally the setup was all the same, including the gulags. The gulags were effectively mini reductions in themselves, where it was complete slave labor and one could not escape from the compound, just as the Guarani Indians could not escape from the compound during the 16th, 17th and 18th century Paraguayan reductions. Indeed, it's quite interesting when you think of the ultra-aristocratic agenda, especially concerning the Merovingians. The Merovingians have always been very particular about their bloodlines and not mixing with other dynasties, though they have their part of the super-aristocracy. They've mixed with the Genoese, the Jesuit oligarchy, and the British oligarchy, and to create this ultra-aristocracy that I like to speak of often. Indeed, the main ideologue for the return to Merovingian style of rule is Gobineau. Gobineau believes that Merovingian style feudalism is the natural way of mankind. Indeed, he was the first to mention the master race. He completely believed in the dominance of the aristocracy over the common stock, and he didn't believe in any half measures. It was either you were either one or the other, you were either the Morlocks or the Eloi. And he was effectively following the dictates of Malthus. Malthus stated very, very similar aims. And indeed, Malthus supported the divine right of aristocracy, but also the divine right of the clergy. And this weaves well back in, especially with the idea of the ancien regime. This weaves well back in with not only the Anglican Church, but also the Catholic Church, whereby those of noble blood, as many bishops and high-ranking members of the clergy were themselves aristocrats, so they were not only bound by the divine right of aristocracy, but also by the divine right of the clergy to rule. So we're getting all these messed up ideas, and in the 1800s this began to mix with Darwin. So we had social Darwinism was accepted by the Catholic Church. Evolution was maybe not so much accepted by the Catholic Church, but social Darwinism certainly. The survival of the fittest, the ultra-aristocrats adored that ideology and were completely content with it. And then we have groups such as the X Club, who used to meet and discuss eugenicist ideas. What I find most fascinating is that very large amounts of the eugenics movement, a large amount of the eugenics movement were Anglican priests and clergymen, which came as not so much of a surprise in the end, I guess, considering that Malthus was himself a clergyman. But it's all quite quite strange, because you have a synthesis in the 1800s of religiosity, divine right, and ultra-Catholicism mixing with eugenics and Darwinism. And indeed, this is utterly bizarre. Surely these are completely conflicting opinions. But it seems to me that the Catholic Church would quite happily use any vehicle to further their own progress, and that the ultra-aristocracy would use any method to further their own progress. It's all about the creation of a new dark age. They want all of us to be ignorant serfs. That's why they're dumbing down the population year by year. You see the younger people, they're all getting more and more stupid. And there is no way back from that. It's all happening by design, and it's really revolting. As I've stated in an earlier video, for instance, regarding drugs. Drug dealing is glamorized in the media, but drug taking, especially people who consume smack or crack, are immediately pushed to the edge of society and scorned and hated. Scorned and hated by the very same people that romanticize about themselves being a drug dealer. So I don't understand the logic behind that. Hence why I've ordered another book by my favorite, Dr. Thomas Schatz. It hasn't arrived yet, but it's called Ceremonial Chemistry, I think. And it's about the stigma surrounding drug users. And I adore his manufacture of madness and the links between the Spanish Inquisition and the psychiatric profession, which is no less than true. As during the era of the Inquisition, if you were caught saying anything which was out of the ordinary in the Catholic rule, you were sent to the Inquisition, to the chambers of the Inquisition. Just as if now you attempt to take on the system and start to expose the lies, you're considered as a nut and sent to the nut house, as it were. But from my own experience, I found the prophets to be in the asylums, and that's where they lock us up. Truth seekers, the bedlamite truth seekers, and we shall not be defeated. But unfortunately we have no common front, as many people are still stuck in the New Age trap, which is completely destroying them, as well as those who are following Alex Jones on the right. None of them are getting it particularly right at all. And indeed, in terms of anti-Jesuit scholarship, there can't be many more than 8, 9 of us. That's about it. It's a rather niche subject, and why? Because it's the truth. The truth is so concealed. You cannot find it until you find us. And then, when you do, if you're ready for how much of a mindfuck it is knowing the truth, you're welcome to join it. Clovis I was the original Holy Roman Emperor / Augustus of the Romans, and then Charlemagne took that title on later. It's quite interesting that Charlemagne, being a Carolingian, married a Merovingian princess. So who knows where the Merovingian bloodline have ended up? Nobody's able to trace it, because it's spun in and out of different other bloodlines, so they're no longer a standalone organization. Thus the Priory de Sion is no longer relevant because the Merovingians have bred in and out of so many different groups of the nobility. And we have so much intermarriage now between Sabbatean Frankists and British nobility and the papal bloodlines. For instance, the Rothschild heiress just married a Aldobrandini noble, which means the Rothschilds have just jumped up several rungs of the ladder. But anyway, it's the biggest thing that annoys me in terms of the conspiracy circles is those that try to split the Jesuits and the Illuminati when they are one and the same. The Illuminati was just a front created by the Jesuits 3 years after their suppression so that they could carry out their activities and plan for the French Revolution. Meanwhile, the Jesuits, priests themselves, were in England colonizing the nation, about 15,000 of them, and everything was being put into place for the takeover of the papacy. So it's really quite interesting, the intrigue behind the Jesuits and the way they work. I believe they must have planned this, 50, 100 years in advance. Indeed, maybe more. I don't doubt that this plan wasn't gestated during the era of the Council of Trent, when the Jesuits first came to prominence, or even during Los Alumbrados. But it was very clever the way the Jesuits took the throne by using the concessions of 1213 and 1215, and thus the land now belongs to the Jesuits. We are the fiefs. We dwell within the fiefs. We are the serfs of the Roman identity, and there is very little we can do about it. Both Britain and America are fiefdoms, and we are serfs. And somebody needs to start listening to the truth, otherwise the serfdom is just going to get worse and worse and worse as we head into an era of pure despotism and barbarous activities on behalf of the elite. Okay, I'm going to fade out here.